Well, we'll get going here. Welcome to the 2024 Experience Modifier. There's going to be a bunch of changes here that will be impacting employers and even more employers. Basically, today we're going to go through why it's a change occurring, what are the changes, the impacts of them, but more importantly, some of the things you need to do to better be prepared for the impacts that are going to come from this. And I'll be shedding some light on those as we go through it. My name is David Lang. I am the Chief Risk Officer for Duncan Financial Group. In addition to helping to identify and analyze and control the risks here at Duncan, I oversee our commercial insurance operations and do the same for our clients. One of the things that I also happened to do and got firsthand insight as to why and how all these things occurred with the Rating Bureau is I was recently nominated and appointed to the Rating Bureau. So I got a lot of insight that I'm going to be sharing for you here today. So quick start. This is how your premium kind of gets derived. You have your payroll, you have your rates, and you have your experience modifier. Now, it's your payroll, however, we do find 75% of premium audits are incorrect. So that's a whole different subject matter for another day. The rates that you have, as you know, change from insurance company to insurance company. They have different scheduled credits and debits. But the one, lack of a term, constant in all this is the experience modifier that is given to you by the Pennsylvania Compensation Rating Bureau, or if you're outside of Pennsylvania, NCCI or some other state rating organization. The state compiles your data and creates a calculation to compare you to your peers. Now, this is one from a little while ago, but as you can see, the state uses 3 years of your data, 3 years of your losses, as I'm showing this sample, and we'll be coming back to this as well. They take 3 years of your audited payrolls and they multiply it by an expected loss factor to determine expected losses. And at the end, they compare the rated losses to the expected losses, actual losses as they call it. But if you go back to the beginning, you'll see that the actual losses were almost $1.4 million with this. This highlights what they refer to as a maximum claim value, or losses as used as they are using this situation. So when it's all said and done, this massive claim was capped out at $42,500. And $42,500 has been the same number for 20 years. This is the first major change in 20 years. And when it's all said and done, they do their actuarial math. And as you can see, the actual losses comparing to experience, the formula comes out with a rating value of 1.82%, meaning that this sample employer was receiving an 8.2% increase in their experience rating, increase in their premium. You also note one of the questions I had years ago to the Rating Bureau, actual losses were less than expected. In most states, you would be closer to 1 if your actual losses were near expected. But in Pennsylvania, that isn't always the case because of the way our formula is structured here. And the formula is not really changing, but all the other values are and how they're calculated. So background, as I mentioned, this is the first change in 20 years. One of the things that's going to change is that $42,500. Currently, that is at $42,500, like I said, but it is going to go to multiple different capping that you will see in a short bit. Obviously, we also have 25% swings in the experience rating. If you have a bad year or a bad loss that comes onto your experience modifier, the most your experience modifier can move in a given year is currently 25%. That too is also going to be changing. So that's where we're at today. But talking to the Rating Bureau, and this is actually right out of their slides that they presented back at the June Workers' Compensation Bureau conference. Little I know that a conversation I had with Bill Taylor, the president of the Rating Bureau, almost 5 years ago, when he was here in Pittsburgh for a certified insurance counselor update class, did I realize that it was part of the reason that this is all changing. Now, I wasn't the sole reason, but it was a little bit of another push. So current rating plan, as we just discussed, 42,500. This is the current formula, actual losses times credibility. And then they add in expected losses times credibility and the limit charge. And then some other, and then your expected losses. So we'll go through all this in terms of that. So companies that have an experienced rating over those 3 years have expected losses in excess of $10,000. Basically, they're saying an audited premium of over $10,000, but in reality, it works out to be about expected losses. So when they did their analysis, which they do every so many years, they determined that there were some issues with the rating program, that the maximum value better performed a single value, meaning having different limits for different sized employers versus the 42,500 was more accurate for them. There was too little credibility for most risks. And one of the questions I prompted and when I was having my discussion with Bill, was that a lot of times when I'm looking at the experience modifier worksheets like we quickly reviewed, and I plug that data into another state, our experience modifiers for businesses that had very little or no losses were much higher than other states. And with that being said, that just didn't seem quite right. And now I know why. There's also going to be about 10,000 to 20,000 additional employers moving from the merit rating program, which basically is what the small employers get. It's either you get a 5% credit if you have no lost time claims in 2 years. You get a neutral value if you have one lost time claim. And then you get a 5% surcharge if you get if you have 2 or more lost time claims. So moving into this, there's going to be a whole bunch of employers because they lowered the threshold downwards from 10,000 to 5,000. So when the state started doing their analysis, they put all employers into quartiles.
Good, how are you?
Please mute yourself.
I did, thank you very much, and I forwarded that off to the Abstract Company, and we have a totally scheduled from 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it. Bye.
Please mute yourself. With regards to what the state found was, when they analyzed businesses and they put them into quartiles, the best performing businesses, meaning the fewest losses, in the lowest quartile, and those with the highest losses, the worst loss ratios, as they call it, in the highest quartile, when they spread that out, something kind of strange happened. On the left is unmodified without the experience modifier. But when they applied the experience modifier, the results occurred. And just so you understand, this is loss ratio, meaning claims to base rates issued by the State Rating Bureau. Base rates are claims and expected claims and claims handling expenses that an insurance company would charge, and then the insurance company uses a multiplier for all their expenses and for different risk type of appetite changes that they look at. So when they applied the experience modifier, the loss ratio, basically when the experience modifier gets added and multiplied in, if you're better than your peers and you get a credit, obviously your premium goes down which means obviously the loss ratio would be adjusted. Well, in this case, the best performing businesses, the overall loss ratio for them was at 85%, meaning that the insurance companies were getting and earning a 15% extra rate charge on the best employers. If we go over to the far right, the worst performers, those with the most losses, were actually getting a 10% benefit. So the best performing businesses were in essence subsidizing the poorer performing businesses in the state of Pennsylvania. So when they look at it and they try to do it a system where the experience modifier is more adaptive and responsive, they would expect that the loss ratio, the modified loss ratio using experience modifiers, would level the field out, that the credits you receive for the best performing and the surcharge you receive for the worst performing would skew everything so that the values would be equal. And that was what their target was. So then they started looking at credibility, the maximum values per claims, the expected loss ranges, all of the factors that went into that formula. And just so you understand, credibility is the factor that the rating bureau actuaries determine that they will use of your losses in comparison to those of the industry average for your class code. So the larger the employer, and as we get into this, you'll see the larger the employer, the higher the credibility. In the past, for a small employer, the credibility started out at 28%. The new program, it will start at 70%. The old system, the maximum was 94%, and the new one will be 93%. So every claim will mean more in terms of your rating values than it did in the past. The fact that you have more credibility when you look at the formula, that means your minimum experience modifier, your modifier, if you had 0 claims, an important number to know what your minimum modifier is, will actually go down as part of this. But since your claims would mean more, every dollar that the insurance company pays will increase your experience modifier, and of course will increase your premium. That amount will actually increase. That's because of the change in credibility. They looked at the maximum values, as we alluded to, and they are changing. Instead of being 42,500 for everybody, there are now going to be 88 different split points. A very small employer would have a maximum value of 10,000 for each individual claim, and the largest employers will be at 300,000 per claim. Back in 2004, when the state did their new experience modifier, I had to make a trip on behalf of several of our associations, because what we saw was for our small and mid-sized employers, that $42,500 charge for the claim seemed to be overly punitive to small employers. We saw businesses that went from a 0.85 experience modifier, they had 1 loss, and they were jumping up into 2.5 or even 3 as an experience modifier. For a small to mid-size, that's unrealistic. So that's when they came out with a capping system of 25% up and down. The whole goal of back in 2004 was to make claim frequency be more meaningful. However, in efforts to do that for overall employers, it seemed to be a little punitive on small employers. On the other hand, I heard from insurance companies that were saying that 42,500 was not high enough for large employers, where they can bring people back to work easier, they can accommodate temporary transitional duty, and they were seeing insurance businesses, for lack of a term, once the loss exceeded 42,500, they were seeing employers that would walk away from the claim and let the insurance company deal with it, which they believe has actually increased the value of claims over the last 20 years in Pennsylvania. So there was a push on both sides to get this right. So now with the new variables I just showed you, as you can see, it better performs now. the curve is closer to 1. It's plus or minus within 3%, which from an actuary standpoint, that is a pretty good outcome. So in this regards, the best performing are going to get more credit in their experience rating, lowering their premium, which means the loss ratio should be more level. The worst performing, those with the most losses, will also receive a higher experience modifier, also helping to level that out. So that's kind of the gist of what's going on here, is that by making the program more responsive to losses and size, they can actually get a better actuarial result with their experience modifier. But as I said, this has impacts to you as an employer. It's going to have impacts to pretty much every employer. It's just a matter of to what degree. So let's go through what's going to happen here. From a standpoint, currently 73% of businesses have a credit, 70, and then 70% will have one. We're going to be seeing about 4% of employers go from a credit to a surcharge. Now that's very important for contractors, because a lot of times contractors, they have to have an experience modifier below 1 to bid on a lot of work. So it's very important to pay attention to that and know what your experience modifier might look like starting in April of 24, because that could impact your ability to win and bid jobs. The experience modifiers, you can see it's kind of a very sharp bell curve. And most employers are going to be in that 0.8 to 1 range. And face it, if you really don't have any losses or very few losses, that is where most went. But if you notice with the blue, it's starting to flatten out. And as you can see, the 0.6 to 0.8, that number increases significantly, meaning the better performing ones are getting lower experience modifiers. And if you notice, there's also now a 1% in the 0 to 0.6, whereas before there were none. So even lower experience modifier minimum values are available. You're also seeing that there's an increase for those that are above 1. So, and this is what they looked at, and their biggest concern with regards to was there were any kind of contractors that would be flipping from credit to debit. But generally speaking, if you were good before, you're still going to have a good experience modifier, but it may be better. So if this is the overall distribution, as I said, it's a very sharp bell curve currently. But when you start looking at it from different sized employers, that curve starting to flatten out. As you can see, below 50,000 expected losses, and just to give that equation, that's probably about $25,000 in premium. Most employers have a mild credit experience modifier. And you'll have some that will have a mild surcharge to those that could be even higher than that. As you get to the mid-size employers, 50 to 250,000, so 25 to probably 125,000 or so in premium, you can see there's going to be a bigger movement for those that have some losses. For the larger employers, over 125,000, there's going to be more that will see a decrease, but there's also a lot more that will be seeing an increase in their experience modifier in terms of the overall distribution based on what they expect. A lot of confusing things there, but long story short, your claims are going to mean more when you have them, and you're going to get rewarded better when you don't. So currently there is a capping process, 25%, with one exception, that if your calculated experience modifier is below 1, but capping would leave you to be still above 1, you would drop all the way to 1. Now, the Rating Bureau did look at removing the capping altogether, up and down 25%, and go with a different one that I was hoping for back in 2004. But what they decided to do was help the employers that have a large unexpected loss. They would get capped up to 40%, but there would be no downward cap. So you can only go up 40%, but after that bad year or bad loss falls off, you would fall all the way down as low as you can go. That's what the insurance department required them to put into place versus removing any capping as a percentage as a whole. However, the insurance department, Pennsylvania Insurance Department, said they want to keep the 25% swing up or down for 2 years. So in 2026, the 40% up and no swing down limit will go into place. For the next 2 years, 24, 25, same thing will apply, up and down 25%, which obviously is very confusing for a lot of employers, is what we have heard. But what they're going to replace this with is a capping formula, a straight cap. And what they're trying to do is protect the smallest employers to midsize from having a massive experience modifier change where it goes up 40%, 40%, 40% for 3 years. They're going to actually put a formula in place that will take your expected losses times this formula, 1.1 times your expected losses. And based on your size, you will have a cap. So the smallest of employers, if your premiums may be, $10, $15, $20,000, your cap, it would be potentially achievable if you have a bad loss or a bad year, in which case, if you look at this current example, during the transition, if your calculated experience modifier is 1.6 and you had a 1.02 before, currently, for the next 2 years, you will go up 25%. You'll go from 102 to 128 and then hit the maximum experience modifier of 1.5. Whereas before, you would have gone from 1.28 to probably 1.6 and then upwards of 1.7, 1.8 or so. Now you're going to cap out at 1.5. After the transition, you would go from 102 to 1.4 and then stop at 1.5 in year 2. So that is their way of protecting the small employers from a single loss. Because a lot of employers, we've seen a number of them where they've had no claims for even 10 years. Then boom, they have one freak accident. Maybe an employee got hit at an intersection or something unexpected happened. The experience modifier, being a future predictor of results, kind of got a little skewed. So that's why they decided to put a claim cap in, which I think will be better. Obviously, if you're a large employer, you're probably never going to hit your claim cap unless you have really, 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 really a lot of bad claims. I mean, really. So as you can see, there will be some capping involved, but ultimately it's only going to affect about 8% of employers once it's fully transitioned out. This is kind of interesting. It's a lot of numbers, but I'm just going to kind of show you what transpires is as employers get larger, their expected losses and premiums get larger. You can see from the current year, let's look at 25 to 50,000. There's 1,178 businesses in the 0.9 to 1 experience modifier. And considering that size employer used to be about a 0.85 minimum experience modifier, there were 6,300 sitting in the 0.8 to 0.9. Well, there's going to be a whole bunch moving into now 0.6 to 0.8, more going into 0.8, 0.9. So you could see there's going to be more businesses getting better credits for their good performance. On the other hand, if you look at the numbers down below and the updated provision, there's going to be a lot more employers that are going to end up pushing out to, 1.5 to 2, out to 2 to 3. And then obviously at 50,000 expected losses, the claim cap is 3.1, as you can see here down at the bottom. Whoops. in which case those would be capped out. But as you can see, the minimum experience modifiers are going down. Where in the past, nobody was ever below a 0.6. Now you can be down as low as 0.5, and the largest employers could be in the 0.4s. So they're going to reward everybody. As you can see here, the percentage of changes are going to be within, probably, I would assume 70% will be within 10%, but obviously there's going to be a number that will be going up more. As you can see, about 10% will actually go up closer to 40. But the biggest thing, as you can see, lowering the eligibility here to $5,000 is there'll be 11% more businesses that will become experience rating. That means there's good, lower experience modifier, lower premiums. But if you do have losses, you will be paying more. But those businesses, once again, if they're smaller, will probably end up in that 1.3 to 1.5 capping range versus where they're at right now, where they're really only potentially having a 5% surcharge for a bad, having 2 lost time claims. So very small employers that are in the experience rating can see a substantial potential increase in their premium because of being now eligible for the experience rating versus merit rating. So that's important to know. And we're going to dig into now the impacts. So this is a comparison where we're at. Eligibility has gone down. Credibility factors have gone up. Obviously, the loss picks, the capping is going to be changing. Now, for contractors, as I mentioned before, actual losses meeting expected, it's going to create an issue because for the smallest employer, if your actual losses meet expected, your experience modifier could be as high as a 1.57, where today, this employer in this example, their experience modifier, if their actual losses were $170,333 instead of $104, their experience modifier would be a 1.338. I'm not going to get into how you can do the math quickly, but I think you might be able to see it on the screen. But that is actually the issue for contractors. So you actually have to really beat your actual losses have to really be lower than expected significantly to keep your modifier below 1. As you get larger, the largest employers, where they have millions of dollars expected losses, that number's going to be closer to 1.15. So, question for everybody, who pays for your claims? Is it you or the insurance company? Well, I'm answering it is actually you. And they do that through the experience modifier. So how much that is, if you keep in mind, for every dollar that the insurance company pays, it increases that experience modifier. For every point increase in the experience modifier, it increases how much you pay to the insurance company in terms of premium over the 3 years of your claim. And we're going to get into how much. We talked about it. A claim will impact you for 3 years, or potentially more if you change your anniversary dates or your dates. If you change your policy mid-year, you have to be careful because you could end up having a bad year impact you for 4 years instead of 3. And then we're going to talk about real quickly the payback ratio. It's a ratio that we explain to our clients as to how much you will repay the insurance company with interest as to your claims. And we're going to see the impact firsthand on this sample employer. And then obviously the rates. So, and there's some other things that impact your costs as well that we can't get into today. So if I take the experience modifier math, this is today's formula. You plug in all the variables from that rating worksheet, but in their premium, their minimum experience modifier is 0.677. Then we get into the formulas as to the minimum could be a 0.69, how much it's costing them, in which case the controllable, the difference between their current premium, 155, and the minimum, which would be at 80,000, is $75,000. So that's how much that employer is paying back to the insurance company that year for past claims on his 3 years. From a what we call our work comp payback ratio, in this case, for every dollar the insurance company pays, increases the premium over 3 years, and that increase, and we can do the math for any employer, turns out that they will pay back 149% of the loss. So that's pretty hefty interest rate of 49%. Shifting to the new formula and values, you can see the credibility's gone up, the limit charge has changed, other values have not changed. The experience modifier for this employer is going to go from a 1.082 to 1.096, very minimal. But the minimum is going from 0.677 down to 0.639. So what ends up happening is, for them, the modifier went up, but it could have gone down. That's a bigger swing. That's the greater credibility. The claim cap for them goes from $42,500 to $47,000. So in the end, what ends up happening is we determined that the payback ratio is going from 149 to 206%. So they're going to, on the claims below their claim cap, they're going to be paying back the claim plus an additional 106%. So that's why I said the impact of this change means it's going to cost you more when you have injuries. And in addition to that, just to give you an idea, there are hidden costs related to workers' comp. Workers' comp does not pay any of these other expenses. One of the biggest reasons why, if you remember on the slide, they wanted to be able to drive employers to be more responsible, I should say, for safety with their employees. So, future increases premium, having to cover somebody's shift while they're at the doctor's or off, lost productivity, damage to product, all that stuff is not covered by workers' comp. So in reality, you're going to be paying, this employer will be paying 206% back, plus all the things that the experience modifier cannot pay for. So there's a lot that an employee injuries cost you. So obviously, best thing to do, not have claims. So when we look at things from a workers' compensation standpoint, being an instructor for the Institute of Work Comp Professionals, we look at the overall process of everything that impacts workers' compensation. On the right-hand side in the green is kind of what, somewhat of what the agents look at, the insurance company selection. But you have to manage your audit. You have to manage your experience modifier. I will tell you 10% of experience modifiers are wrong and 90% are mismanaged. I don't think that's going to change with this, but with this change in formula, because it's still data in, data out. So you have to look and manage your data. So one of the things you want to look at when you're managing experience modifier is, what are the losses on your loss runs look like? If you have losses that have big reserves, what do you need to do to get the insurance company to lower them? You just can't come up and say, hey, lower the reserves. They are legally required to post reserves to pay the potential future claim. If they anticipate that claim to be that size, they're not going to just change it because you asked them to. You actually have to say, hey, wait a minute, we're bringing somebody back, they're on transitional duty, therefore the amount of wages going out is going to be lower. Or maybe there's a recent doctor's appointment that their prognosis had improved and now they're going to be back to full duty earlier. That's when you can go and take that information and basically say to the insurance company, please lower this reserve, because reserves count as paid when it comes to your experience modifier. So on the other side, as you can see, managing your injuries, getting people back to work is a huge thing, because now that you're going to be paying to the insurance company even more money, it's more important that you, not have, or sorry, try to keep those injuries that do occur to be as small as possible. At the bottom, you want to make sure you're not having the claims there. Business improvement, that safety behavior, behavior-based safety, dealing with safety compliance, the culture of your organization, trying to prevent those claims altogether. So I am going to allow anybody to pop in here for some questions, but anybody that attended, we will reach out to you. We will do an experience modifier projection for your 2024 experience modifier. When we reach out to you, we'll explain to you what we need from your 2023 or first quarter of 2024 experience modifier, so we can project what that will look like after the change and see what the impact's going to be. And with that, we are open for questions. I did get one during the thing I thought I may address with regards to credibility. Just so everybody is saying, the credibility is the weight mathematically that the actuaries use for your losses as part of the formula. Okay. Yes, I'm looking at one of the questions. Yes, we will send you an email with what we will need. If you have an experience modifier worksheet, you can forward that to us and we can use it. If not, we'll send you a letter authorizing us to get the experience modifier worksheet from the rating bureau. And that will allow us to do that. I do have a question. When will this all be announced? That is one of our friends that works for an insurance company. It was already announced. It was announced at the June Workers' Compensation Conference on June 2nd. This is already passed and cleared, and it is now in the circulars on the Rating Bureau. So this is officially published and has been so for probably about 3-4 weeks now on the Bureau website, but the official announcement was on June 2nd. Yes, okay. Is the merit rating portion going away due to the lower 5K eligibility? No. Merit rating is actually in the law. They cannot get rid of merit rating. It is required by the law that they have that availability for small employers. But what they found was there were a significant number of employers that maybe had a bad loss or two that were being thrown out and had to go to, let's say, the state fund, because an insurance company would say, wait a minute, we can't get the adequate premium because of the losses you had, in which case, now with the potential higher experience modifier, they're hoping more employers will be able to avoid going into the state fund. And number two, they also saw the same thing I did. For small employers, your 5% is not much of a credit. So merit rating doesn't go away. They're just lowering the eligibility to 5,000 in expected losses, because anything lower than that, they can't actuarially figure out. Let's see. Okay. I do believe that I do not have any more questions. Johnny Mike, do you see anything on your end that I may have missed from a chat or question?
Did you just get the one that just came in, David, for the
Oh, there we go.
invitation?
Thank you. I didn't scroll down far enough. Thank you. Any indication from your PC or contacts that the change will affect future loss cost filings? Oh, man. How many hours do you have? Just kidding. Yes, what's going to happen is for April of 24, they are going to do, when every April of each year, well, technically prior, they announce what the new rates will be for each class code. what they're going to do is they're going to perform that task of figuring out the rates based on today's formula and today's values, because that's how they figure the insurance companies are kind of set up and looking at from a rating standpoint. Then they're going to apply the new formula and look at it as a global thing. And depending upon if, let's say, going to the new formula causes the overall performance to indicate that the insurance companies will be receiving too much extra rate because of the new formula, they would, it sounds to me like they said they would, obviously adjust that and lower it. On the other hand, if they, as a whole, the industry is not receiving, they would increase it. So I can't really give you an answer other than they're going to do the calculation as is to try to figure out the rates, and then use the new experience modifier formula to adjust rates accordingly so that it's neutral from an overall industry standpoint. Once again, keep in mind, each insurance company has their own multipliers to determine their final rates. They have plus or minus 25% credit or debit to further adjust rates. So you'll want to have a conversation months in advance of a renewal to say what's going to happen. What do we need to know? What are we looking at? So hopefully that will give you an idea. I got a thumbs up, so apparently it is. Okay. I do believe I can't see anything else. My co-pilot, Johnny Michael.
Don't see anything else there, David. I think you covered it all.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, with that, if you have any questions, you have my email address right there on the screen. Feel free to email me. And then, like I said, we will reach out to you to offer you an experience modifier rating projection for you for 2024. And with that, I appreciate you attending today. And if you need anything, feel free to reach out. Thanks and have a great day.